Hey, this is Zircon, and today I'm going to be taking a look at a very interesting virtual instrument that really could not be more different from things like Serum 2 and Pigment 6. It is not a traditional synthesizer. It's actually closer to something like the Korg Wavestation or anything that uses vector-based synthesis. It's called CUBE by Lunacy Audio, and there's a bit of a story behind this video. I get a lot of offers from different developers and music gear companies offering to send me things, and they want me to review them or promote them or whatever. I have said no to literally 100% of them until now. And to be clear, this is not a sponsored video. I did not receive any money from Lunacy Audio for checking this out. Basically, they sent me a free copy and I said I will check it out. And if I like it, I'll do a video on it, but you're gonna see the content at the same time everybody else will. So this was not subject to any kind of editorial approval. These are my unfiltered opinions. If they want to deactivate my copy after this, they're more than welcome to. But it's notable that I found this interesting enough to actually cover. This is one of the most unique virtual instruments I've seen. Here's a little preview of what's to come. So let's dive in. We're going to check out CUBE in the latest expansion, Astra. I'm going to give you my thoughts on it, and we'll see if you think it's worth a look. Ready? Let's dive in. So the first thing, as I do with a lot of synths, is I try to actually use it in a musical piece. If I can get inspired by it, if I can find a creative use for it, something that inspires me or resonates, great. If I spend a few hours with it and I can't make anything usable, then that's kind of the end of the story, and I'm probably not going to touch it again, or I'm going to send it back or whatever the case is. So let's hear what I did with about an hour of just using CUBE and the latest expansion, Astra. You get the general idea. It's basically a loop at this point. This is the kind of music that came to me when I was experimenting with the synthesizer. So let's dive in and take a closer look at what's going on. What you see here is the orbits tab, and this is kind of the centerpiece of the instrument. It can load up to 8 layers of sounds at once, and each one of these sounds is pretty interesting. They have a diverse library. It's a mix of acoustic instruments, electric instruments, synthesized waveforms, loops, ambient textural things, vocals. This, to me, is more similar to the library, which I really like, in an instrument like Omnisphere. It's very varied, it's very creative. It doesn't have a lot of just bog standard, super basic waveforms, which I think is very overdone and it's not very useful at this point. If you click on one of the sound sources, I'm going to solo this one. So this one's called Critter. We can play this back at different points. And then, of course, there's lots of other sound sources in here too. This is the sound source browser. You can browse by expansion, of which there are quite a few at this point. There's tag-based stuff. And I can't emphasize this enough. It is a very diverse library of samples. It's not going to be for everybody. I would say if you're into more cinematic music, textural stuff, atmospheric stuff, you're definitely going to be right at home. If you want realistic string ensembles or brass sounds with legato, then this is not the instrument for you. It's not that kind of instrument. Let's browse and check out what some of these sound like so you have a general idea of the type of sounds available. You can see the waveforms here, change the playback point. You see what I mean by the ambient and textural element, right? Now this particular sample is very short, so what you might do is enable looping. And now you get a rhythmic element. Or we could go to the tweak tab and we could set up some kind of arpeggiator here. Let's go ahead and make a simple pattern. Now this is in chord mode, which is playing all the notes at once. If we switch this instead to up, it's going to actually arpeggiate between the notes that are being held. What's interesting though is that each of the individual layers can have their own arpeggiator. So what we do on layer D with waterlogged tape, if we go to layer C, which is a completely different sound, you can hear that they have their own independent rhythmic elements, or in the case of terrestrial voices, it has no rhythmic element at all. Instead, we could set this one to a quarter note arpeggiator, and this one could be chordal. So let's say I set up a pattern like this, some octave jumps, and then it could kind of go down like this in length. If there's one thing that I can say, this is all about motion and all about rhythm. This is a perfect tool if you need some kind of pulsating element, or you need something to drive a track forward. You need little bits of ear candy in the background, or certainly if you're doing cinematic scoring where there's a lot of stuff where you need to drive the action and the drama. And often the way you do that is with these pulsating rhythmic or syncopated elements. Anything like that, it's ideal. And here we're just using 2 different sound sources, but again, it loads up to 8. And then that's not even to speak of the orbit element here. If I manually crossfade between these by dragging this ball around, you get an idea of how it works. When you start adding one of these more interesting orbits rather than just dragging it around manually, Squidward, I like the creative names. You really get into some very interesting motion territory. This is just one of the sounds I was using on the track, but let's see what some of the other ones are doing. Also, in case it's not already clear, everything here is from Cube, and specifically the new Astra expansion. I wanted to see how much I could do with just that. And you can see exactly what's happening here just by watching the ball. Let's see if we use a different orbit, what we can get. And there's actually a set of LFOs on top of the orbits and the arpeggiators and all that. In this particular patch, the LFO is not being used, but we do have a macro assigned to Bit Crusher Mix, and we're automating that. If we go to the main tab, you can see the macro in action. I really like this patch, actually. This is one of my favorites from the new expansion. Now for this arpeggiated pattern, this is basically to create like a texture. So it just has a little side chaining from the kick. And we can see what the orbit's doing. Let's try a different orbit. And as you can see from the bottom, it's also possible to speed things up, change the rotation of the orbit, which is pretty interesting. For example, if you don't like the fact that this uses only the back sound sources, you can just rotate it such that it uses like the ones on the right. Have I already said enough that this is very much an atmospheric and cinematic kind of instrument? So Astra has some pretty interesting string type sound sources in here. There's thread tremors, which is what you're hearing primarily. It's crossfading into the terrestrial voices. I would say the presets are very well designed. I did want to make one of my own just to see kind of how difficult it would be. So this one is very simple in comparison to some of the others. If I go to the overview here, you're going to see it pretty much just uses two different sound sources here. Well, three different points on the matrix, but two different unique sound sources. And so if I go into the tweak tab here, you can see the arpeggiator that's being used. And this is making use of some of the built-in effects. The effects rack is pretty solid in terms of the quality of the effects. I do wish that you could, drag these around and change the order or be able to instantiate multiple. But in terms of what's here, pretty solid. We're using saturating distortion here as well as a compressor to really level out the sound. And the low pass filter you'll see is being modulated, if we go to the mod tab, by this square LFO. So if we wanted to make this a little bit more rapid, what we could do is just make this a quarter note, for example. If we go to the mod matrix, you can see all of your modulations at once. It's always nice to have a mod matrix view. I really wish they had that in Pigments. Here, once again, we have multiple different arpeggios that can all be synced differently. We can have all different kinds of LFOs synced differently, and then we can have orbits. Let's, in fact, create a new orbit. I'm going to go ahead and drag this up to the corner. Let's say this is step 1, and then for step 2, we'll drag it over here, add a step, and put this in this corner. For the 4th step, let's have it go here. And then by holding shift, we can drag it towards the background. One more step, drag it back up and to the middle here. And then for a final one, we'll go back to our original point. All right, what does it sound like? Yeah, all right, it's pretty cool. And now at this point, we can also play around with different sound sources. This is the kind of thing that I found myself doing a lot. If I got a rhythm that I liked, well, we could just play with different sound sources and see what we come up with. But you can also do this automatically. They have some options to randomize orbits, randomize sounds. I don't know. It's a lot of fun to play with the sound design here. It's a very different experience than using a traditional synthesizer, but it's certainly unique, and I definitely find it very inspiring. Let's just check out a couple of the other sounds I used here. This is a particularly interesting orbit, I think. Very cool visuals. I'll put on the wish list, it would be nice to have more macros, but I think what they were going for was a focus more on ease of use. So they didn't want people to be overwhelmed with like a million different knobs, which I understand. Still, maybe they could have like an easy view like this, and then in a Cube version 2, maybe you could click, I don't know, advanced view, and then get 4 different macros, for example. Minor complaint. This is one of the other sounds that you hear more in the intro, this lead. I mentioned earlier that this is not the kind of instrument I would use necessarily for very straightforward leads, but you can do some interesting stuff with it if you change the cutoff points, adjust the envelope. This one has a fairly interesting orbit. I don't know, some of these are really interesting. Watch that all day. Very hypnotic. And here's one of the other sounds I use, nebula grains. A lot of these started as presets just as is from Astra, and then some of them I adjusted a little bit more than others to fit in the track and change the orbit in some cases. I'll wrap up by showing some of the presets that I did not feature in my little demo track here, but that are included with Astra. Still going. So there is Cube by Lunacy Audio with the Astra expansion in a nutshell. Do I recommend it? I would have to say it really depends on the kind of music you're doing. If your sole focus is, for example, modern house music and bass music, and you want stuff that's very upfront, clean, dry, format wavetable type sounds, then this can't really do that. On the other hand, if you're like me and you enjoy things that have a lot of atmosphere to them, evolving elements, textural elements, if you're doing film scoring, video game scoring, I would say that it's definitely worth a look. And if you're somewhere in the middle, if you're a producer or composer that doesn't do fully ambient or atmospheric or cinematic stuff, but you also want something that is very unique and that's very inspiring compared to the presentation and workflow of pretty much any other synthesizer aside from, like I mentioned, the Korg Wavestation, then I would say it's still worth a look. At the list price of $149, I'd say the value is decent, but at a sale price of $99, I'd say it's a pretty darn good value for the amount of presets that come with it, and the presets are very rich and complex and well designed overall. So with that in mind, once again, love to hear your thoughts on this, or if you use it yourself, is it finding your way into your music, or is it just sitting on the shelf? Let me know in the comments below. This has been Zircon, and I'll see you in the next one.